Hello everyone, welcome back. 2 revolvers on the table for you. Really the same revolver, but one of them has been converted to cartridge use. Now this is something that I showed in a fairly recent GameSpot video because it was reminiscent of something in a game that I was talking about and because I think they're really cool. But actually, what I called it was the door revolver, percussion revolver. Here is the percussion version. Now, most people, and not many people know about this gun, but the people that do call it the door revolver, D-A-R-W. But there's a lot more to that story. So on the reason why it's called the door, well, a couple of reasons I suppose, but there's a very obvious one on the barrel flat here. This one's been inlaid with some chalk or talc or something that people do for photography reasons. We don't do it, and if this was put on display, we would carefully remove it. But in this case, it helps you read what's on the barrel, which is George H. Dorr, and that's George Henry Dorr. His working address, 57 Threadneedle Street, London, and a patent number as well. So he, just by default, nearly every revolver of these that exists has his markings on them. That's probably the main reason everyone calls them the door. So, incidentally, it says patent number. That's a quirk of percussion revolvers in particular. When it says patent number something, or it's pretty much referring to, that's the serial number, because they're maintaining a list of guns made to that patent. So this is that number gun from that list, effectively. It doesn't mean that this refers to British patent 1747, because it doesn't. You'll see that on the Adams revolvers. In fact, get this out of the way right now. I think I love the look of these things so much because they seem to be a perfect combination of the graceful lines and the handcrafted finish, lovely deep bluing, colour case hardening, all of that, of the British Adams revolver, percussion revolver, and the sort of racing lines, if you like, of the Colt percussion revolver. Well, the open top, the sort of forward lean. It looks a bit more aggressive, perhaps, the Colt than the Adams. The Adams is quite tall and chunky. This is a perfect blend for me of the two. Now that's just the aesthetics, although that sort of does affect the ergonomics, how it holds, how it points, and it points really nicely. Nicely balanced. The sights line up sort of automatically, almost. While I'm at it, the sights are a possibly silver bead, in this case anyway, conical bead on the front there, and then quite a diminutive little notch. Not unlike the rear sight on a Colt percussion hammer, funnily enough, but relocated from here to forward of the cylinder. That does reduce your sight radius somewhat, which in theory would make the pistol slightly less accurate, but you really have got plenty of distance here. This is quite a long barrel, at least on this model. There were a range, as nearly every pistol at the time had, of pocket, belt, and holster size in different calibers. So the different sizes, there was a holster size, which was 38 bore, that's about 50 caliber, which is pretty immense, with a 6-inch barrel. The Army, which is in 54 bore, or .443 inch, which is a 6-inch barrel again, and they're 5-shot, because the caliber's too big to actually fit a 6th shot into the cylinder. There's then a Navy in 80 bore or .387 inch caliber, 5-inch barrel, and the smallest, which we have as well actually, is the Pocket in 120 bore, .338 caliber, amusingly, and another 5-inch barrel length on that. So I've just chosen the one for you today for the sake of time. So Dorr, despite having his name all over the revolvers, did not make these. He was the retailer, the main, by far, the dominant retailer of the type, so his name became attached. The actual makers were Charles Price and Paul Cashmore. So Charles Price, you recognise the name Price from the later Webley Price. There is a connection there. He was a Birmingham gunmaker, and Paul Cashmore was based in West Bromwich in the Midlands. And they lodged a patent, or received a patent, together, December 1855, British patent number 2018. And that described various things, the most important of which is the trigger mechanism. And that's really what distinguishes this from the other percussion revolvers of the era. And it's quite straightforward to demonstrate. It is what we would now call a double action mechanism, what was then called self-cocking. So we have, on the face of it, we have a half cock and a full cock. And we do have those positions. However, the lockwork in here, the patented lockwork, allows you to half cock it using the trigger and then full cock and fire by pulling through on the trigger. I'm just saving the percussion nipple by using my thumb. In reality, you just pull through. So you can either pull through all the way past the click and it will fire. So you can rapid fire this thing. An advantage over the Colt, of course, as it was for the Adams. Or you can, without having to use your thumb at all, stage the trigger to that point, relax the muscles, carry it in this position, ready for action, and then pull through the rest of the way to fire the gun. A really neat lockwork there, I think you'll agree. Some of you who are into this era will be thinking, but Tranter's already done something like that, and he did. So I believe we've covered a Tranter in a previous video, but that system had a trigger that protruded through a slot in the trigger guard. I'll show you a picture of this from the collection. You pull that back with your middle finger, and that stages for a very light trigger pull here. And if you're careful, you can sort of spam both triggers, as it were. It is, in fact, one long trigger to get that rapid fire effect. I think this is, who am I to say this? I'm a 21st century museum curator, but talking about the 1850s, but I think this is a much superior system. You're not having to faff around with the double trigger, and indeed the later Tranters abandoned that double trigger for a more straightforward series of lockworks where it was just what we would now call double action, or double action, single action. The ability to fire raise and drop the hammer by pulling through, or by cocking it for a more accurate shot. I think you probably know the drill by now with double action and single action, but this is one of those hybrid systems with an additional feature. Very nifty, I think you'll agree. Something else that was patented by them was an improvement to loading levers, and we see on this that there's a push button. This is very slick, actually, with a linkage system here. And you press this catch to drop the loading lever, and then that linkage allows you to, if we just line up the cylinder, put it back in place, to drop that down and ram your bullet home. Percussion revolver, it has to have a rammer. Well, it doesn't have to have a rammer on the gun, but nearly all of them did, for obvious reasons. You don't want to be carrying around a separate ramrod to load this thing. What else can we see? This is in beautiful condition. Sadly, no case. This design has a round barrel, except for that flat on the top. I think it also lends to its appearance. This sculpted shape for the barrel here. It is like a Colt in that it has a wedge holding the barrel onto an axis pin, and then you have the cylinder, and then you have the frame with the lockwork inside. Walnut grip or stock, as we would probably call it in Britain, and a lanyard loop. There's some nice colour case hardening still on this thing. It's a really beautiful piece. The hammer is interesting as well. It has a big, wide, flanged nose. You can see that there. Really wide for a percussion hammer, but then in the centre is that round impact surface. There's also, if I full cock it, you can see there's a little notch in that round impact surface, as I'm arbitrarily deciding to call it. And that is designed to sit, like a Colt, on a little pin between each of the nipples, so that is in a safe condition, 5 chambers loaded, ready to fire, and all you have to do to make it ready to fire is pull through on the trigger or cock it, because you can, of course, still cock it manually all the way back for a single action shot. So they've kind of thought of everything on this one. Very nice indeed. I can show you a little bit more on the cartridge conversion, because the wedge on this one is nice and loose, of how this goes together. So we just push out that. I mean, nice and loose wouldn't be a good thing on a not on a working revolver, but nonetheless, I can push that out with just my thumb, and then that allows us to carefully slide off the barrel assembly. So you can see we have our bore, of course, rifled bore. Such a big improvement over the single shot pistols of the immediate prior generation, which are still around for some cavalry, as we've covered before on this series. And there's the socket there with the wedge across that locks it into. It's just like a Colt in this respect, but that feature's not patented, so they're free to use it. 2 pins on the front of the frame that engage with the 2 holes on the bottom of the barrel. And then, now you have to be able to take this off on the cartridge conversion, because it works just like a Colt cartridge conversion, in that you have to pop off the cylinder, and you can see what we can actually see there, just quickly. This is standard revolver stuff, but there's a pawl or a hand, both terms are used, that slides up the breech face to engage with the ratchet wheel on the back of the cylinder. This is standard. This is how all revolvers from Colt onwards, and in fact prior to Colt as well, as we've covered before, that's how they all work. One way or another, there's something pushing up on that ratchet surface to get you to the next firing position, the next chamber. And there is also a cylinder stop visible in here. That pops up and stops the cylinder from turning. The cylinder itself is 2 parts, so it's a real faff to load this thing. You can probably see around that ratchet wheel are firing pins for each chamber. So I believe this has been converted for 450 Adams, or that family of cartridges. I didn't check, stupidly, but they're all interchangeable. 476, 450, and the later 455, which this definitely isn't. And those firing pins are captive in this rear part of the cylinder. There's a location peg here to make sure you line it up with the front half of the cylinder. So part of the conversion is to, as well as removing the loading rod, is to throw away your old percussion cylinder, or keep it in case you want to deconvert for some reason, not likely, and have a whole new cylinder made for you. Now, unfortunately, somebody at some point this is a slight design flaw of the conversion, is that peg doesn't only sit in that hole. It also sits, if I misalign it, into the chambers. Why does that matter? Well, your firing pins are no longer aligned with your primers if you do that. And that's what's caused these horrible divots in the quite possibly iron rather than, well, it will be iron rather than steel cylinder. So those firing pins, which have been hardened, almost certainly, well, they would be steel, are beating the heck out of that cylinder. Now, we haven't done that. That's been done by the owners. So when you load this with your 5 cartridges and insert the other half of the cylinder, you'd have to locate the peg in the hole and keep it in that condition. Slot it onto your axis pin, replace your barrel with your wedge out. Line everything up, make sure it's cinched up together, push the wedge back through, and there you go. Not something you're going to do in a gunfight, but as we know from modern gunfighting in various contexts, civilians don't tend to reload their firearms anyway. So you have your 6 shots and you get the heck out of there, or you'd have won. So, not that gentlemen were gunfighting every day of the week by any means. And we are talking about gentlemen here. These are, all these handmade British percussion pistols are high-end bits of kit, though at least one of them thought it worth upgrading his to the latest cartridge system. So if Price and Cashmore were the inventors and the actual makers of these things, what was Dorr? Well, he was the retailer, as I've said. He sold and marketed these things, but marketing is the key word. He was if it was a band, he'd have been the front man, but I suppose he's more like the hype man. He was out there getting reviews, favourable reviews, in magazines, journals, advertisements placed around the place to try to essentially big these up over and above, well, the rivals, the Colts, the Adams, whatever else was available, the sort of slightly lackluster so-called transitional revolvers. This was a promising product, but it had to be pushed. Now, he did manage to get a very favourable quote from the Book of Field Sports. This was by a journalist called Henry Miles, and it was, "Its form is of the handsomest, its finish exquisite, and it is one of the pleasantest in the hand of the many varieties of revolver we have examined." Now, if that sounds pretty gushy to me. I'm not sure if they were doing paid reviews at that time. To be honest, you might well find a sporting journalist who was as keen on these as I am and would have said all that and meant it. Despite the fact that these didn't really become that successful, there was a presentation case set given by Dore to General Garibaldi, the revolutionary leader in Italy. If anyone knows where that ended up, is it still around? Have you seen any photos of it anywhere? In the research I was able to do for this episode, I wasn't able to find any trace, except that we know he did provide Garibaldi with one. So that was in 1864. So getting on for a decade from this thing first appearing on the market. Dore is pushing pretty hard. Price and Cashmore and Dore, in fact, they all carry on in business until the 1880s, 1890s even. But they kind of fade away, and I think that's to do pretty strongly with Colt in America, of course, and perhaps to some extent Adams and Tranter, but certainly Webley. Webley became the dominant force in British handguns, and they sort of beat everyone else out, really, with their military contracts. I'm sure Dore and Co. were hoping for military contracts for these. They certainly named them, things like Army and Navy. But there are about 5,500, I think, of these were made that we know of. It's not nothing. It's not completely forgotten, but very few people know about it. I don't think I'd ever seen one until I came to work here. Thanks for watching this episode, guys. Do check out our social media accounts. We've got Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our website, our collections online site as well, for more information on the collection. Obviously, come and visit us if you can. If you're in the UK or if you're visiting these islands, we have 3 different museum sites that you can come and visit. All information is on the website, but we'll see you again next time.